Hey guys, tonight we are crawling into a world where sleep isn't safe, naps aren't private, and sometimes dozing off can get you literally flogged in public. You're in ancient Rome now, shoulder to shoulder in a noisy, sun-bleached city where the smell of olives mixes with sweat, and the streets don't ever really quiet down. Pigeons flap from columns, sandals slap cobblestones, and somewhere, someone's yelling about fish sauce, and you're just trying to get some rest. But sleep in Rome isn't just about lying down after a hard day of public bathing and judging senators. No, friend, sleep is a risk. If you're poor, you live stacked in a smoky tenement, where snoozing too long near a candle might burn the whole block down. If you're rich, you worry that falling asleep at the wrong feast might be seen as an insult worthy of social exile or worse, a long, awkward public poetry recital. And if you're a soldier, sleep could cost you your life. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and what time it is where you are. I want to know who else is trying to snooze through 1,000 years of weird punishments. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're in a Roman insula, an apartment building with paper-thin walls and a chronic rat problem. It's midnight. The street below still echoes with the clop of hooves and the muffled cursing of late-night drunks. You curl up on your straw mattress, itchy from fleas, and finally start to drift off until a scream jolts you upright. Downstairs, a tenant has been caught violating the curfew. Turns out, curfew isn't just about staying indoors. If you're found sleeping too deeply during a city watch patrol, it's assumed you've been up to no good or worse, missed your assigned civic duties. The punishment, public flogging. With a twist, the guards, likely half asleep themselves, have a nasty habit of dipping their lashes in brine first. Ancient Rome had a thing for making everything a little extra salty, and sleep that wasn't always considered virtuous. In fact, excessive sleeping was often seen as a sign of laziness, gluttony, or cowardice basically. The Roman trifecta of personal failure. If your neighbor caught you napping at odd hours, you might be reported for shirking your work quotas or temple obligations. Imagine that tattled on because your siesta went 2 minutes too long. Historians still argue whether these sleep quotas were formally tracked by civil authorities or simply enforced through social pressure and local gossips. But either way, Romans didn't exactly believe in rest as we do. Sleep was seen as something to be earned, not a basic human need, but a luxury given after service to the gods, state, and family. You were supposed to be up before sunrise to pray, clean, and march, not drooling on your tunic while the city bustled around you. Now, if you were enslaved well, then sleep became even more dangerous. Enslaved people caught asleep outside sanctioned hours could be beaten, branded, or even sold off for being low energy. One fragmentary legal tablet even describes a bizarre punishment where a slave was forced to sleep standing up for a month, strapped to a post. Talk about the worst kind of sleep training. One odd Roman belief that dreams were more honest than waking life. If someone dreamed of betrayal, theft, or worse, those dreams were sometimes considered prophetic. And if a community leader was found snoozing when he should have been dreaming properly, yes, that's it. It was taken as a sign of spiritual impurity. There's even a recorded ritual where a local priest was made to lie awake for 5 straight nights, while being fed only mint leaves and sheep milk, just to cleanse his sleep path. Spoiler, he didn't have many dreams. He did. However, vomit on day 3. And yet, even among all the punishments and pressure, sleep had its defenders. The philosopher Seneca, bless his sleepy soul, argued that rest was crucial to moral clarity and clear thinking. He recommended sleeping at least 6 hours, ideally in silence, ideally with a wool blanket and no interruptions. Which sounds nice until you remember he was writing this from a country villa while his slaves prepared heated bath water and guarded the door. Meanwhile, you try to nod off again, but the smell of burnt olive oil from your neighbor's dinner is wafting through the cracked wall. You hear footsteps, a slosh of water, and then of course the screaming returns. Someone else is getting disciplined. You sigh, roll over, and bury your face in your blanket. You're starting to understand why some Romans took to napping in the thermae, the giant public baths, not for the hot water, but because it was quiet, steamy, and oddly anonymous. No one dared to whip you in a spa. Probably. And speaking of spas, did you know some emperors banned bathing before bed? Claudius supposedly believed it invited lazy sleep spirits that made people dream of rebellion. That's right. No bath equals no coop, or something like that. By now, your eyelids are heavy again. The city murmurs on, and in a corner of your mind, you wonder, is it possible to get punished for dreaming too hard? Well, you'll find out. Probably tomorrow. You've barely managed 4 hours of sleep when the morning clamor starts. Chickens screech from a rooftop pen. A street vendor hawks suspiciously early figs, and some poor mule collapses outside the bakery. But you, bleary-eyed and half-dreaming, are expected to rise, because in Rome, sleeping in is more than a faux pas. It can be a public spectacle. Especially if you're anywhere near the Senate, you shuffle toward the forum, half draped in your toga, stepping around puddles that you hope are just rainwater. The air smells of ash and citrus. Up ahead, the grand steps of the Curia Julia loom, Rome's political heart, where powerful men gather to debate things like grain tariffs and, apparently, the proper etiquette for staying awake. It's not long before you spot the man of the hour, Senator Caelius, known for his impressive neck fat and unimpressive oratory skills, has nodded off mid-speech. His head lolls to the side like an old melon, and the chamber is holding back laughter. One senator mutters, he's dreaming of better rhetoric. Another mimics snoring noises behind a scroll. In ancient Rome, this wasn't just mockery, it was grounds for scandal. Political culture demanded alertness as a virtue. Falling asleep during debate implied negligence of duty, or worse, silent protest. You weren't allowed to zone out while Rome decided the fate of provinces. So when Caelius's little nap goes viral, well, as viral as it could in 54 CE, his rivals pounce. The scandal leads to an actual reprimand, a vote of censure recorded in stone. He's forced to publicly apologize and recite a speech on civic vigilance, while 2 assistants stand behind him holding, yes, literally symbols, just in case he drifts off again. This, by the way, becomes a short-lived Senate tradition-clanged object to wake up inattentive officials. The practice lasts exactly 1 month before someone breaks a lyre over a colleague's head and it's banned for being too enthusiastic. Historians still argue whether this nap incident led to formal Senate rules about drowsiness, but fragments from the Lex Senatus Somniculosa, a likely satirical nickname, mention limits on extended eyelid closure. You can't make this up, except that maybe someone did. The line between law and elaborate mockery in Rome was as thin as a senator's tolerance for boredom. But the thing is, you kind of get it. These speeches are long, droning, and often delivered by guys who think quoting Virgil backwards counts as clever policy. You find yourself yawning, and that's when your neighbor nudges you sharply. Careful, he whispers. If the quaestor sees you, you'll be polishing benches all week. Indeed, minor punishments for sleeping in public forums include janitorial labor, memorizing civic scrolls, or being assigned to work a grain counter. One poet even writes of a friend who had to recite the 12 tables from memory while standing in a vat of cold water. That'll wake you up. Now, not all public sleepers were treated equally. If a noble fell asleep, it was embarrassing, but survivable. If a foreigner did it, they were sometimes fined or humiliated. One Egyptian merchant was reportedly made to wear a donkey mask for a week after dozing off during a tax negotiation. Sleep with donkeys, look like one. The magistrate quipped. Classic Roman humor. And then there's the strangest rule of all the hypnos stigma, or sleep mark. This is fringe, but some records suggest a ritual where known public sleepers were marked literally with a bit of soot on the earlobe or neck. This wasn't permanent, but it was visible enough to shame someone for weeks. Think of it like ancient Rome's version of a sticky note saying, "I nap when I shouldn't." The stigma fades eventually, but the memory lasts. Despite this, Romans didn't entirely hate sleep. They just wanted it timed perfectly. Midday naps, for example, were perfectly acceptable meridiatio, especially during the hot summer months. The city would slow to a crawl around the 6th hour, and people would disappear into shaded homes. But heaven forbid you close your eyes before the designated siesta hour. That could be interpreted as disrespecting the calendar, or worse, the gods. You wander back through the city now, wondering how many other people are fighting to keep their eyes open. You pass a bakery where a boy is nodding off over loaves. His mother smacks a wooden spoon against the counter, wide awake in half a second. Across the plaza, a barber trims a client who's snoring lightly. The barber shrugs. He pays. "I cut," he mutters. You find a fountain and splash your face. The cool water jolts your senses, but it also reminds you that you slept terribly, and tomorrow you're expected to show up to the Temple of Janus for dawn rites. Anyone late or looking drowsy will be assigned incense duty, standing next to a smoky brazier for 4 hours, eyes wide, or else. One last odd detail: Romans believed certain types of sleep were morally superior. Warrior sleep, where you fall asleep instantly and wake up alert, was admired. Merchant sleep, light and full of dreams, was considered soft, and criminal sleep heavy, dreamless, and long was seen as suspicious. You'd better hope your posture looks noble while you nap, and so you trudge back to your insula, passing a mural that shows a man with a scroll in one hand and a pillow in the other. It's not art, it's a warning. Sleep, in Rome, is both sacred and suspicious, and if you're not careful, someone might accuse you of dreaming. Against the Republic, you wake up with a start again. This time, it's from the metallic clatter of armor, A small crowd is swarming toward the arena, the kind of energetic tide that smells like excitement, sweat, and overpriced roasted nuts. The Colosseum is hosting a midday match, and you unfortunately are being dragged along by your overzealous neighbor who insists you haven't lived until you've seen a man nod off in full armor. You're skeptical, but then again, this is Rome, and stranger things have happened. So you grab a sun-dried fig, slip into your seat among the bloodthirsty citizens, and wait for the oddest nap in history. The gladiators are introduced with the usual fanfare, horns blaring, announcers yelling over each other, tunics flying. Out comes a veteran, Flavian, known as the Stoic. He's fought 50 matches and survived them all. He raises his hand in salute, but there's something off. His eyelids are fluttering. His shoulders sag. He's doing that thing where your head dips just an inch too far and then jerks up again. Yep, he's sleep deprived. Turns out Flavian was kept up all night under suspicion of hiding a love letter from a senator's wife. Not the crime of the century, but bad enough that he was chained upright for hours with no food. Now he's about to face a younger, eager opponent, and he's visibly swaying. The audience notices first. Murmurs ripple through the marble tiers. Someone throws a date pit at him. Then comes the ultimate Roman insult: silence. Not a cheer, not a shout, just an uncomfortable hush as Flavian shuffles forward and slumps to his knees, still breathing, not dead, just dozing. Now here's the thing about Roman entertainment. It wasn't really about the combat. It was about the dignity, the performance, the illusion of heroic struggle, and a guy snoring on the sand that shatters the whole illusion. There's no valor in drooling. The arena master panics. He waves his arms. An assistant runs out with a torch, not to burn Flavian, mind you, but to hold it near his feet. A kind of Roman smelling salts. Flavian stirs, wipes his chin, and wobbles upright. But the crowd has already decided. Thumbs start moving, some up, some down. There's no real consensus. Historians still argue whether a sleeping gladiator was subject to the same death by crowd vote as one who surrendered. Some sources claim it was up to the editor, the sponsor of the games, to decide whether dishonorable unconsciousness was a punishable offense. In this case, the editor was a famously cranky senator with a distaste for naps. Bad luck, Flavian. But instead of ordering death, the editor calls for penance combat. This meant the match would continue, but Flavian would start with a handicap. Literally, his shield was taken away. Now he'd have to fight bare-handed while barely awake. The announcer declares it a battle of body versus slumber. Surprisingly, the match isn't over in seconds. Adrenaline kicks in. Flavian dodges, rolls, even manages to land a hit. The crowd warms again, because if there's one thing Romans love more than a perfect warrior, it's a comeback. He lasts another full minute before collapsing again, face down in the dust. This time, the crowd's decision is unanimous. Let him live, not out of pity, but because they want to see if he can recover and fight another day. After all, what's more Roman than dragging yourself through sleep-deprived agony for public approval? You leave the arena with questions, like, why didn't someone just let him nap before the fight? But in Rome, the spectacle always comes first. And besides, this wasn't an isolated case. Some gladiators reportedly used sleep as a tactic, pretending to be dazed, catching a moment to breathe, or even sneak a nap in longer fights. One account mentions a fighter nicknamed Dormio, who survived 3 matches by faking narcoleptic episodes. He was eventually banned for mocking the gods of struggle, and in one of the weirder anecdotes, a minor match in Pompeii ended when both fighters fell asleep from heat exhaustion. The crowd didn't get angry. They started throwing petals and cooing as if watching 2 giant babies. A mural even depicts the moment, with the phrase, "Sopor est victoria," sleep is victory. Of course, this attitude didn't apply to regular citizens. Try falling asleep during a civic parade, and you'd find yourself with a chalk C marked on your tunic and a fine for disruption of morale. Gladiators got glory. You got graffiti. You shuffle home, still buzzing from the strangeness. Rome has rules for everything, even slumber in battle. You stretch out under a shaded portico and think maybe you should fake a little arena nap tomorrow, just to see if anyone throws petals at you. But for now, you close your eyes. No torches, no sand, just the soft hush of a Roman afternoon. And finally, mercifully, no one's punishing you. You wake to the sound of a drum, slow, deliberate, too rhythmic to be festive. It echoes like a warning through the morning fog outside the Roman castrum, the military camp. Something's wrong. You're in uniform now, tunic tight under your armor, the leather straps stiff with old sweat. Around you, legionaries form up in silence. No jokes today. A grim tension presses down like an anvil. Someone whispers, "It was Claudius. They found him asleep on watch." That's when your stomach knots. Because in the Roman military, sleeping on duty wasn't just a mistake, it was treason. And the punishment was as brutal as it was symbolic. They call it the fustuarium. The drumming stops. The commanding centurion steps forward and calls the unit to attention. He lists the charges. Claudius, posted on night watch outside the perimeter wall, was found asleep while the rest of you relied on him to keep the camp safe. And here's the catch: everyone knows Claudius. He's a quiet guy, dependable, probably exhausted from the last forced march. But rules are rules. The centurion pauses. You all know what must happen. Claudius doesn't beg. He just lowers his head as a guard ties his wrists and leads him to the center of the formation. His hands tremble slightly, not from fear, maybe, but from the shame of knowing what's next. Then the weapons are passed out. Not swords, clubs. You and the rest of the unit are handed wooden staves. And then, one by one, you are expected to strike him. That's the fustuarium death by the hands of your own brothers in arms. A punishment not just for the individual, but to sear the lesson into everyone else's memory. This is no fringe rumor. Ancient sources confirm it. Sleeping on guard duty was one of the few crimes punishable by this ritual execution. Even minor negligence like failing to keep your torch lit could invite a severe beating or demotion. But if the lapse was serious enough to endanger the cohort, that's it. No trial, just sticks and silence. Historians still argue whether this was applied consistently or selectively. Some suggest that certain officers used it more for fear tactics than actual enforcement. Others point out that some legions used mock fustuarium for training purposes, replacing the condemned man with a stuffed mannequin. Still disturbing, but less messy. Claudius. He doesn't scream. That's what you remember most. The hits fall, one after another, and though he stumbles, he doesn't cry out. His eyes stay open, locked on the sky. Afterwards, the blood is washed off the dirt with vinegar water. The staves are burned. The cohort is dismissed in silence. No one talks about it. No one ever really does. And yet, you can't stop thinking about it, because sleep, which should be a refuge, becomes a crime under the wrong conditions. Fall asleep at a banquet and you're mocked. Fall asleep at a gate and you're murdered by your own comrades. And they call it justice. Back at camp, you try to rest before your next shift, but now sleep feels dangerous. Your eyes flicker shut, then snap open. Your breathing is shallow. Every creak of the tent, every groan of leather or rustle of wind makes you jump. You wrap yourself in your cloak, trying to fake calm, knowing that if anyone catches you twitching too hard in your bedroll, they'll wonder if you're drifting off too early. And it's not just soldiers who fear sleep in the military world. Roman generals often demanded sleep reports. Yes, reports detailing how many hours each officer slept during campaigns. Some units used paired watch shifts, where one man stood guard while his partner dozed for exactly 90 minutes, switching off with military precision. If either fell asleep too soon or too late, both were punished. One curious quirk, in some elite units, like the Praetorian Guard, punishments for sleep-related offenses were bizarrely theatrical. A guard caught napping might be paraded around camp with sheep wool wrapped around his head, symbolizing that he'd become as docile as a farm animal. Funny in theory, humiliating in practice, especially when your job is to protect the emperor. And while soldiers feared punishment from above, they also policed each other. Sleep rats. That's what they called the men who crept around at night pretending to be asleep, just to catch others nodding off. No one liked them, but they were effective. One such rat was later found tied to a horse, naked, with the words "Dream Thief" carved into the saddle. Guess you don't mess with tired legionaries. You finally manage a light doze, cheek pressed against your folded tunic. Outside, the wind rustles the tent flaps, and a torch sputters. No one dies tonight, but the weight of Claudius's punishment lingers. The lesson is burnt into you in Rome's army. Sleep is a privilege bought with loyalty, not a right granted by nature. And if you forget that, well, there's always the Styx. You'd think escaping the Roman Empire would help you sleep easier. But tonight, you're in ancient Athens, and things aren't much better. The air smells like thyme and charcoal. Cicadas chirp in waves, but no one's settling in for bed. Instead, they're gearing up for what might be the most exhausting event you've never heard of: a public sleep deprivation contest. Yes, you heard that right. You sit cross-legged under the olive trees just outside the gymnasium, where a group of young men, citizens in training, philosophers in waiting, are already a few hours into the challenge. The rules are simple: no sleep until the last man blinks. What's the prize honor? Mostly. Also, a laurel wreath and free wine for a week, which in Athens counts as a decent salary. The leader of this insomniac madness, none other than Aristarchus, a student of Socrates, whose big idea was that true self-discipline meant conquering even the need to sleep. You should be the master of your body, he booms, pacing between the participants. Sleep is the coward's retreat. Easy for him to say he's been sipping honey water and quoting Heraclitus, while the others look ready to pass out face first into the dirt. Next to you, a boy named Timon is visibly fading. His head droops, his mouth slackens. A fellow contestant jabs him in the ribs with a stick. Still here, Timon chirps, a bit too loudly, before laughing nervously. and biting his tongue. Historians still argue whether these competitions were officially sanctioned or just one of Athens's many weird intellectual flexes. Some suggest they originated from military training, others from symposiums that got wildly out of hand. Either way, records show that winners were sometimes recruited into elite guard units, because who better to guard a general at midnight than someone who's proven they can stay awake for 3 days straight? You wander through the agora as torches flicker, casting shadows on the white marble columns. Even at this hour, a few merchants are still packing up. You spot an old woman dozing against a fruit cart, her hands still gripping a bundle of figs. A patrolman nudges her awake with his staff. No sleep on temple grounds, he mutters, not unkindly, and moves on. Sleep here isn't criminal, exactly, but it is highly regulated. In certain areas, you're expected to stay alert, especially near civic buildings and sacred sites. Doze off near the Erechtheion. You might be fined for disrespecting Athena. A scholar once fell asleep while transcribing laws and was forced to redo the entire scroll by hand with a dull stylus. Back at the gymnasium, the crowd's thinning, sir. A few spectators have given up and gone home, but the contestants press on. One of them, a wiry man named Lysias, is sitting perfectly upright, eyes wide open, breathing in an eerie, rhythmic pattern. He looks serene, like he's transcended sleep itself. Another guy is hallucinating, muttering about a golden turtle that's trying to recite Euripides. And then you notice someone new approaching, Socrates himself, barefoot and draped in the same frayed tunic he always wears. He squats next to the contestants and starts asking questions about virtue, about consciousness, about whether a person who sleeps is still themselves. One boy, desperate to stay awake, tries to answer coherently. His eyelids flutter. Is virtue? Snoring, he mutters, before collapsing into Socrates' lap. The philosopher simply chuckles and keeps going. You lean back, slightly amused. This isn't just a test of endurance, it's a test of philosophy. Athenians believed sleep dulled the mind. Dreams could reveal truth, sure, but sleep itself, that was the domain of the passive, and the passive were never heroes. Interestingly, some thinkers did stand up for slumber. Aristotle, later on, would insist that sleep was necessary for memory and emotional clarity. Hippocrates believed bad sleep could lead to madness, while good sleep helped balance the humors. But here, in this moment, you realize you're watching people fight nature with pride, and then someone wins. Lysias is the last man sitting. His competitors lie strewn across the grass like casualties from a very quiet war. Aristarchus stands, hands raised. Lysias, son of Polycrates, conqueror of sleep. The crowd, what's left of it, cheers. He's wrapped in a laurel wreath and doused in cool water. Someone hands him a goblet of wine, which he promptly drops because his hands are shaking too badly to hold it. As you walk home, you think about how weirdly common this is across civilizations. The Greeks weren't alone in punishing or testing people through sleep. In Egypt, temple priests would go days without sleep while fasting to receive divine visions. In Babylon, judges were required to sleep facing north to ensure dream purity. It's as though everyone agreed that sleep was powerful but dangerous, something that had to be controlled, not trusted. You reach your borrowed cot in the corner of a stoa, curl up against a wall still warm from the day's sun, and let your eyes close. There are no drums, no torches, no angry philosophers, just crickets, a few wine-sloshed snores in the distance, and the soft whisper of the Acropolis above you, silent and dreaming. You drift through a dream of papyrus and golden sands, only to wake beneath a painted ceiling inside a cool, echoing chamber. This isn't a home, it's a temple. The Temple of Serapis, to be exact. And tonight, you're not just here to sleep, you're here to be judged for it. Welcome to ancient Egypt, where slumber isn't a break from the world, it's a hotline to the divine. But be careful, a dream might reveal more than you want it to, and worse, it might get you punished. The priest of Serapis enters quietly, his footsteps barely audible on the polished stone floor. He's wrapped in linen and incense, his fingers stained from dream ink. Around the chamber, others sleep on woven mats, their heads tilted back, eyes twitching beneath closed lids. You're one of them now, part of a rite called incubation. You were told to fast all day. No meat, no wine, just lotus seed tea and silent reflection. Why? Because in Egypt, dreams are messages, and temple sleep is how you receive them. But if your dream is impure, frightening, filled with snakes, fire, or symbols of chaos, that's a problem. And that's where the dream police come in. Okay, not their official title, but close enough. The priests of Serapis were not only spiritual guides, but interpreters of visions. After your night of ritual sleep, they sit you down and ask very gently, very formally, what you saw. And if you lie, they'll know, or at least they believe they'll know. Their training includes dream symbolism, psychological patterns, and what modern people might call a sixth sense for nonsense. You recount your dream, something about swimming in a black river, a crocodile offering you a golden cup, and your teeth falling out into the sand. The priest frowns. That is not a good dream, he says. You laugh nervously. Well, maybe the crocodile was just thirsty. He doesn't laugh. Instead, he makes a mark on your scroll and tells you you'll need purification. You'll be barred from temple duties for 7 days. You're given bitter herbs and told to sleep facing east, wrapped in a specific colored cloth yellow. To encourage optimism, you've just been penalized for dreaming. Historians still argue whether these punishments were more spiritual than civic. Was this meant to cleanse the soul or control the population? Some scholars believe temple dreams were leveraged to maintain moral behavior. If people feared their inner thoughts would be exposed through sleep, they'd be less likely to rebel, cheat, or plot. It's like divine surveillance, except your own brain is the snitch. And while Egypt is best known for its reverence of dreams, not all were treated equally. Temple dreams were sacred, regular dreams often dismissed. If a farmer dreamt of flooding, it was a personal omen. If a priest dreamt of flooding, it might become national policy. That distinction had serious consequences. Back in the temple, a younger man is sobbing softly. His dream, apparently, featured the falcon god Horus bleeding from the eyes. The priests murmur. That kind of imagery suggests betrayal or sacrilege. He's led away, not punished, exactly, but isolated, given only barley and cold water, a cooling period, they call it. And in an even stranger twist, some dreams were punished preemptively. If you'd been known to dream of fire more than once, you might be restricted from working with flammable oils. If you dreamt of rats, you couldn't work in grain storage. Entire job assignments were altered by your nighttime visions. You exit the temple after dawn, your body stiff, your head buzzing with symbols. You weren't whipped or fined, but you were watched, and that's its own kind of sentence. From now on, your dreams belong to the record, but hey, it's not all terrifying. The upside, if you dream of a golden ibis or a lotus blooming from your hand, you're rewarded. That's considered a divine nod of approval. You might even be granted new privileges, a better place to sleep, cleaner linens, or even a blessing from the priest himself. Imagine that social mobility via a REM cycle. Outside the temple, daily life resumes. Vendors shout, kids chase goats, the Nile sparkles with early light, and yet you feel exposed, like everyone now knows what's inside your mind. You pass a scribe who winks. Bad dream, he asks. You nod. How did you know? He taps his temple. You're walking with your left foot first. That's what the marked ones do. Marked ones. Dream sinners. You'd laugh if it weren't so eerily organized. Still, as the sun warms your skin and the city comes to life, you realize something in Egypt. Dreams are a serious business, and if you're not careful, you might just sleep your way into a sentence. Tonight maybe you'll just stay awake. Snowflakes brush your face like whispers. You blink into the dim blue hush of early morning. Your breath fogging in front of you. You're in ancient China now, Tang Dynasty, 7th century, and your body is aching from a night spent pacing the stone paths around the imperial court. You're cold, tired, and confused. Because all you did was yawn. Yesterday, while delivering scrolls to the emperor's inner chamber, your eyelids drooped ever so slightly. Just one yawn, not even audible, but in the meticulous etiquette of the Tang court. That was all it took. You'd broken a fundamental rule of Jing, or respectful alertness, and the punishment night patrol. Not inside, where incense burns and fire pots warm the corridors. No, out here, in the imperial gardens, wearing an itchy wool cloak, forced to walk in slow, silent loops while being gently watched by guards with very awake eyes. The Tang dynasty had a love affair with discipline and a distinct suspicion of fatigue. Sleep was necessary, yes, but showing signs of sleepiness in the presence of nobility, that was a disgrace. Courtiers were expected to appear eternally focused, brows furrowed, posture perfect, and feet always pointed inward to show deference. Yawning wasn't just rude, it was a potential sign of boredom. And boredom in the presence of the emperor, well, that bordered on treason. Some sources even suggest there was a specific official in the court, half scribe, half snitch, who recorded signs of drowsiness during royal audiences. These scrolls weren't published, but they were kept, just in case. A noble who repeatedly nodded off might find themselves reassigned to far-off provinces, or worse, retired with a flattering poem and a quiet suggestion to stop attending court. Historians still argue whether these punishments were formal or just enforced by unspoken tradition. But there's documentation of a prince who allegedly lost favor for sleeping during a music recital performed by the emperor himself. He claimed he was meditating. The emperor claimed he was snoring. The prince was never seen again. You trudge past a frozen pond now, your boots crunching softly. In the moonlight, You spot another figure also on punishment patrol. She nods at you. You recognize her Lady Sin, a minor consort who reportedly fell asleep during a mid-autumn poetry contest. Her prize 2 weeks of garden silence and a ban on scented oils. Of course, not all of ancient China was this rigid about rest. The general population had practical relationships with sleep. Farmers rose before sunrise, napped briefly during high noon, and went to bed early. But in court life, where politics and performance blurred, rest was suspect. That suspicion extended to dreams too. Tang mystics and scholars paid close attention to dream symbolism. A dream of a falling tree, ill fortune. Dreaming of an empty bowl. Social disgrace. Dreaming of sleeping itself. That was rare, and usually seen as a sign of deep confusion or moral ambiguity. You could be summoned to a local magistrate and questioned, not because of what you did, but because of what your subconscious revealed. You pause to warm your fingers. A passing servant glances at you, pitying. They'll ring the gong soon, she says. If you fall asleep now, they'll make you rake the sand garden. You force your eyes wide. Punishments in this court didn't involve whips or stocks. No, they were poetic, symbolic, designed to teach a lesson without drawing blood. Fall asleep during a ceremony, you might be made to copy Confucian texts on virtue by candlelight for 20 nights straight. Caught drowsy in an imperial meeting, you'd be ordered to drink bitter tea brewed from wake root, a pungent, sour herb that tastes like old shoes and rage. One scholar, Master Yu, became legendary for his self-imposed anti-sleep routines. He wore a ring of small bells on his wrists that jingled if he nodded off. His headrest was shaped like a scroll, so that even in sleep, he was supported by knowledge, charming, and also wildly uncomfortable. But there were rebels too. A small literary sect known only as the Dreaming Ginkgos believed sleep was the gateway to divine insight. They held secret midnight salons where poets read aloud from their dreams. Believing the emperor's distrust of sleep was a kind of blindness. One was arrested for writing a poem about drifting into heaven with closed eyes. Sedition, apparently, smells like jasmine ink. You reach the end of the path, where a small brazier flickers near a pine tree. The guard standing beside it motions you forward and pours you a ladle of hot water. 2 more circuits, he says, then maybe sleep. Maybe. As you sip the steaming liquid, you think about how sleep so soft, so human can be turned into a wedge, a test, a tool of status. You remember that it wasn't always this way. The earliest dynasties held rituals where kings slept deliberately in sacred temples, hoping to receive wisdom from ancestral spirits. But that was centuries ago. These days, if you fall asleep in the wrong moment, all the spirits in the world can't save your career. You start walking again. The snow has slowed. Your feet are cold, but you keep moving because you've learned the lesson in the Tang court. Even your yawn might echo louder than your words. You're inside a cold stone room now. The air is damp, the windows small, and the only light comes from a guttering candle that throws long shadows across the floor. You shift on a creaky wooden bench, bundled in a coarse robe, feet wrapped in wool. It's the middle of the night in a medieval monastery somewhere in Europe, France. Probably, but you're not sleeping. Not yet. Because someone else did. And he talked. The monk sits alone in the center of the room, head bowed. Brother Theobald, round-faced, pious, and unfortunately for him, a midnight murmurer. Last night, during the prescribed first sleep, he mumbled something. And not just anything. He was heard whispering fragments of a banned hymn and something about bread turning into birds. Not heretical. Exactly. But in a monastery that takes vows of silence seriously, even a sleep mumbled amen out of turn is enough to summon suspicion. And now, Theobald is being examined not just by the abbot, but by a fellow monk who acts as a sort of spiritual dream, interpreter/inquisitor, because in this world, sleep is not sacred unless it's silent. You sit nearby, not punished yourself, but assigned to witness, to learn. That's what the abbot says. But really, you're here to absorb the shame of it all, to understand the cost of undisciplined dreams. Monastic life in the Middle Ages operated on a tightly structured schedule horarium, dividing every hour of the day, including sleep. Monks would wake at regular intervals to pray, often interrupting their rest to attend matins and lauds in the dead of night. The idea was to train the body to be ever ready for divine service. You sleep when the bell allows it. You wake when it commands. Theobald broke that rhythm. And worse, he brought voice into silence. That, in this era of rigorous control, is dangerously close to inviting spiritual contamination. Historians still argue whether sleep talking was seen as a moral failing or simply an unfortunate disorder. Some monastic texts refer to it as night wandering of the tongue, while others describe it as the soul's hidden voice, a whisper that bypasses virtue. Either way, punishment varied from mild penance, extra prayers, fasting to more curious measures. Tonight, the abbot chooses the middle path. Theobald is assigned a week of wake vigil. That means no sleep without supervision. For the next 7 nights, he'll rest on a low stone platform in the chapel with 2 other monks watching. If he begins to speak, they'll wake him with cold water or by tugging his hood. If he stays silent, he earns back his privilege to sleep alone. You're told this isn't cruel, it's protective discipline. But even you, not yet full novice, can see the line between spiritual care and soft torture gets blurry after midnight. And that's not the only strange case. In a monastery near Cologne, one sleep-talking monk reportedly shouted out the name of a woman twice. That monk was sent to scrub the privy chambers for an entire month and forbidden to handle any ink or parchment. Why? Because if desire leaks into your sleep, what might it do to your conscious thoughts? Better to quarantine the mind, they said. Then there's the Welsh account of a monk who, during a midnight prayer, fell into a trance-like doze and began reciting snippets of pagan verse. The brethren were horrified. He swore he didn't remember, but they claimed the devil was using his dreams as a megaphone. The solution? A week of dream fasting, no meat, no milk, no images, and a vow of mental emptiness, which, frankly, sounds harder than actual fasting. Monastic punishments for sleep offenses weren't limited to speech. Rolling over too noisily, excessive snoring, or sprawling, yes. There were rules about how wide you could stretch, could all result in penance. Sleeping face down was especially frowned upon. It symbolized spiritual sloth, the body pressing into the earth rather than reaching toward heaven. You curl into your cot that night, back in your own cell, the scent of beeswax thick around you, your eyes flutter shut. But you don't let go, not completely. You're too aware now of what your body might betray. Your dreams must stay quiet. Your tongue must stay still. Your posture, even in unconsciousness, must suggest devotion, and still part of you resents it, because deep down you suspect that even monks can't control their dreams. Even saints must sometimes murmur nonsense. And maybe, just maybe, the holiness isn't in the silence, but in what your soul says when your lips forget to lie. But tonight, best not test the theory. Not with Theobald still wet-haired and shivering on that stone bench across the hall. You're stumbling through the foggy morning streets of a medieval English village, now somewhere in Devon. Judging by the mossy thatch and perpetually muddy shoes, you pass a stone church, a crooked tavern, and eventually reach the edge of a field where something strange is happening. A boy no older than 12 is being led by a priest and a constable toward the village green. His hands are tied with soft rope, not tightly, but enough to make a statement. His eyes are wide open, but the villagers whisper that he hasn't really woken up, because last night he walked into the baker's yard and knocked over 3 flour sacks. He tripped a bucket, smeared soot across a church door, and ended up asleep in a pigsty, all without ever stirring from his dream. The crowd watches as the priest announces it. A sleepwalker has trespassed on sacred ground. There won't be a beating, thankfully, but there will be penance. And that's where you come in. You're assigned to help oversee the strange rite that follows. They call it the Dreamer's Walk. It's not in any official canon, but it happens more often than you'd think in towns like this. The boy will be led around the village with a bell tied to his ankle, a warning and a blessing all at once. It's believed that sleepwalkers walk a path between worlds, and if that boundary isn't resealed, strange things might slip through. You trail behind as the boys walked past wells, gardens, and the chapel steps. Villagers murmur prayers. Some toss salt over their shoulders. Others avoid eye contact entirely. The boy doesn't react. He's awake now, mostly but still sluggish, like someone climbing out of deep water. The priest stops at the lich gate and dips a sprig of rosemary in holy water, flicking it at the boy's feet. Let no dream take root where the soul should not wander. It sounds poetic, but it's really just fear. Because in this age, sleepwalking wasn't just a medical oddity, it was often seen as a sign of possession, enchantment, or even secret sin. Historians still argue whether these sleep-based rituals were more about social control or spiritual belief. In places where law and religion overlapped, sleepwalkers could be accused of witchcraft, especially if their nighttime wanderings involved livestock, circles of stones, or God forbid chanting. One 14th century record from York mentions a woman who sang in Latin while asleep, wandering the abbey corridors. She was examined for demonic influence and confined to a convent for purification. Later entries show her living quietly, but never again allowed to sleep alone. Back in your village, the walk ends with the boy's shoes being burned. It's believed they carry residual dream energy, like spiritual footprints. You'll get new ones after a full moon passes, but it's not just sleepwalking that brings punishment here. Nightmares, too, can mark you. You remember a man named Alric Old, hunched, fond of ale, who once burst into a town meeting claiming his dream had shown him the local magistrate with a goat's head and burning eyes, a demon in robes. He cried. They laughed at first, but then the magistrate fell ill. Coincidence, maybe, but now Alric sleeps chained to his bed frame, just in case. The priest said, "You walk past Alric's cottage that evening. He waves at you through the window, a long chain visible near his ankle. Dreams travel farther than horses. He calls, then chuckles to himself. You ask the priest later if dreams can really be used as evidence. He shrugs. The devil works where he is least watched. Why not in dreams? And sometimes dreams are called upon on purpose. Enter the sin eater. You meet one near the forest, an older woman with dark eyes and a satchel of herbs. She doesn't live in the village but is summoned when needed. When someone is dying, she'll sit by their bedside, whispering gently, "Give me your dreams." The belief is that a person's final dreams might hold guilt, unsaid confessions, or secrets that need cleansing. She consumes a bit of bread placed on the sleeper's chest, symbolically eating their sins through the dreams absorbed into the body. She claims to see images in her sleep afterward. A burning house, a locked door, a river running backwards, and for that, she's never welcome at feasts. Children aren't allowed near her. Some say she doesn't blink. Others say she sleeps standing up. Like horses, sleep, in this world, is more than a rest. It's an open gate. And if you're not careful, someone or something might walk through it. You curl up that night on a straw mat in the corner of the village hall. The windows rattle faintly in the wind. Somewhere outside, a bell tinkles on a boy's ankle. You try not to dream. You're in Venice now, sometime in the late 1400s, wrapped in silk and confusion. The room smells of beeswax polish and rosewater, and somewhere a lute plucks a melancholy note. You lie stiffly on a canopied bed in the corner of a noble household not yours, of course, but you're here to witness what happens when the sleeping mind gets blamed for waking crimes. Across the room, a servant girl sobs into her apron. Her cheek is swollen, her hair half loosened. A nobleman stands in the doorway, face pale, fists clenched. He doesn't deny striking her, he just insists quietly, with increasing desperation, that he was asleep when it happened. It was the sleep hysteria, he says. I dreamt I was fighting a thief. You exchange glances with the household steward, who mutters something in Italian that definitely isn't complimentary. Welcome to the Renaissance. The art is beautiful. The punishments for sleep-related madness, even stranger. Here's how the nobleman explains it. He retired after a feast, slightly drunk, but not insensate. Sometime in the night, he leapt from bed and attacked the servant, shouting words he doesn't remember. 2 other witnesses say he looked possessed. One swears his eyes were open. Now, instead of a simple confession and a fine, the noble's fate hinges on something both terrifying and slippery, whether sleep can excuse violence. Historians still argue about these cases. In Venice and Florence, there are records of trials where defendants claimed somnambulismo furioso, violent sleepwalking, as a defense. And sometimes it worked, because Renaissance Europe, obsessed with bodily humors and lunar influences, was beginning to see sleep as not just rest, but as a second consciousness. You weren't you when you were dreaming. You were your body's ghost. But there's a catch. Only certain people got to make this excuse. If you were a noble, doctors might be summoned to examine you, check your sleep habits, measure your pulse at night, even inspect your sheets for signs of restless movement. One Venetian physician wrote that a troubled dream leaves the pillow wrinkled like the brow of a liar. If you were a servant, a merchant, a woman. The phrase sleep hysteria was more likely to get you punished than excused. There's the case of Marta, a laundress who reportedly shouted secrets in her sleep, secrets about her employer's debts. She was dragged before the magistrate, who ruled that no servant dreams without reason. She spent 10 days in the public stocks, wearing a sign that read, "I spill truths while dreaming." Back in the nobleman's room, a panel of advisors debates his punishment. One suggests a night locked in a dream chamber, a small marble-walled room where he'll be forced to sleep under observation by candlelight, with a scribe present to record any noises, murmurs, or twitching. If he says anything violent, they'll know. If he sleeps like a lamb, he's free to go, with only a warning. They call it resting proof, a kind of trial by sleep. And it's not as rare as you think. Venice had an entire set of informal rituals designed to test the truth of dreams. If a crime was claimed to be committed during a dream state, the accused might be fed a lucid tonic, a herbal blend meant to enhance clarity during slumber, and asked to re-enter the same dream. Witnesses would observe. If they moved or spoke the same way again, it was taken as proof. The problem: these tests were wildly inconsistent. Sometimes they were overseen by judges, sometimes by superstitious relatives with a penchant for strong wine and even stronger bias. And the punishments, too, varied. One woman, accused of wandering the streets at night and tearing laundry from lines while sleepwalking, was sentenced to carry bells tied to her ankles for 3 months, every step jingled. A nightly reminder that she was no longer trusted to roam unnoticed, even in dreams. Another man, a violinist, claimed to compose his music entirely while asleep, when he refused to play during the day, saying he was only creative under moonlight trances. His patron threatened to lock him in a cellar until he could prove otherwise. That trial never finished. He disappeared before the full moon. You sit now on the edge of a stone bench in the nobleman's courtyard, watching the torches flicker as night falls. The air is sweet with jasmine and judgment. The nobleman has been led to the dream chamber. 2 guards stand outside. A priest blesses the doorway, and somewhere in the city, someone else is closing their eyes, unaware that tonight their dreams might become evidence. You wrap your cloak tighter. In this place, sleep is never just sleep. It's a test, a courtroom, a confession booth made of silk and shadow, and you might be next. You shuffle your way through the muck of a rainy Parisian street, ducking past carts, chickens, and the occasional cabbage tossed from a window. It's the 1600s now, and while the rest of the world sharpens its swords and tunes its lutes, you're thinking about one thing, only finding a dry place to sleep. Luckily, there's a solution if you've got a coin or two. You spot the faded sign of a public lodging house, a crude drawing of a straw mattress beneath a crescent moon. Inside, it smells like damp wool, garlic, and dreams shared too close together. Welcome to the world of rented slumber, where even your exhaustion is on a ticking meter. You're guided toward a long, low-ceilinged room lit by a single oil lamp. Rows of lumpy straw pallets line the floor, packed in tighter than books on a monk's shelf. A weary woman waves a hand at you, already holding out her palm for payment. 1 sol for half an hour, she says. 2 if you want your own blanket. You look around. Everyone else is horizontal, boots still on, eyes shut but twitching with the kind of stress that even sleep can't fully erase. Someone nearby snores like they're sawing a tree underwater. Another moans faintly, whispering "Mon père" in a voice so soft it feels stolen. In this century, sleep has become a marketplace, and Paris isn't the only place with these communal sleeping houses. London has them. Amsterdam too. Records describe sleep benches in inns, where patrons paid by the quarter hour. Even in respectable homes, servants were expected to rent time in the corner of the kitchen or under staircases, whatever nook could be spared. It sounds bleak, but for some, it's a blessing. Urbanization means people no longer sleep where they work or work where they live. The city is always awake, so the body must rest in shifts. You lie down and immediately notice the chalk marks on the floor demarcating each renter's space. Elbows out of bounds, that's an extra fee or a swift nudge with a wooden spoon from the matron. Then comes the bell. It rings softly once. Time's up for half the room. Those who paid for 30 minutes groan and begin to rise, while others slide into the vacated straw. Still warm. It's like musical beds, except the music is mostly silent. One man refuses to move. He's clearly still dreaming, arms flailing slightly. The matron walks over and pours a bit of cold wine down the back of his neck. Out, she says. No refunds. Historians still debate whether this short sleep system evolved purely from necessity or if it reflects a deeper cultural change in how people viewed time and rest. The rise of clocks, no longer just for cathedrals, but for homes and businesses, broke up life into measurable chunks. Sleep became schedulable, commodifiable. Even the church noticed. Some sermons from the period warn against sleeping in the devil's hour, meaning naps taken between midnight and 3 a.m. Supposedly when the soul is most vulnerable, but for many, those were the only hours they could sleep. You walk through the back alley after your shift of slumber. A man is curled beneath a staircase, his hat over his eyes. No chalk lines here, no bell, just exhaustion. A constable passes and taps him with a stick. No street sleeping. Go to the halls. The man nods, but you see him tuck deeper into the corner. And then there's the nap tax. Yes, it's real. In some quarters of Paris, sleeping in public spaces, even benches or doorways, could result in a small fee collected by parish guards. Technically, it was for maintaining public decency, but everyone knew it was just a way to keep the poor moving. You once heard of a tailor's apprentice who was fined twice in one day, once for dozing under a bridge, and again for snoring too loud in a public bathhouse. "I pay to breathe now," he muttered. There were odd loopholes, though. If you were seen reading while napping, it was considered intellectual fatigue, and sometimes excused. A clever baker's son kept a book open on his chest every time he slept on the bakery floor. The priest walked by once and muttered, "May the Lord bless diligent study." He didn't mention the crumbs stuck to the boy's face. By evening, you return to the lodging house for one last rest before work. This time, you pay for a full hour, luxury. The matron even offers you a better patch of straw, less lumpy, more in shadow. You settle in. Across from you, a woman cradles a child who's already asleep, thumb in mouth. She pays for 15 minutes, but they both stay longer. No one kicks them, not tonight. And for a moment, this strange little world of timed sleep and borrowed blankets feels almost kind. You're all here. After all, tired, dreaming, sharing warmth in a city that never really pauses. You close your eyes, no bells for now. You're kneeling now on a bamboo mat, head bowed so low your nose nearly brushes the floor. The air is still, heavy with incense. You are in Japan, late Edo period, and the room around you radiates quiet power. Scrolls hang neatly along the wooden walls. A single candle flickers beside a painted screen, and behind that screen, a samurai watches. You're a servant in the estate of Lord Takeda, a minor but fearsome daimyo who's famous for his sharp calligraphy, sharp swordsmanship, and his utter intolerance for drowsiness among his household, which is a problem, because your knees ache, your back is stiff, you haven't slept properly in 3 days, and now, just as the clock ticks past the 9th hour, your body betrays you. You yawn? Barely, but the candle flickers with your breath, and that's when you hear it, the soft whip of silk robes, the brush of sandals on tatami, and then the fan, not just any fan, his fan. The lacquered one with the crest of the Takeda clan, never opened in haste. It makes no sound, and yet somehow the moment he lifts it, you feel it in your spine. Fatigue is the door through which dishonor enters, he says softly, and you've left it ajar. In the Edo period, especially within samurai households, alertness was discipline. To sleep unbidden was a sign not just of disrespect, but of weakness, mental and morale. Sleep wasn't relaxation, it was submission, something to be mastered, contained, rationed out like rice and ink. And so came the punishments. Lord Takeda does not strike you. That would be too easy. Instead, he assigns you shadow duty, a poetic phrase for a night spent kneeling in silence in the garden, watching the moon. You are not permitted to sleep, or speak, or shift your gaze. Should your head dip even slightly, the guards will notice, and they will report. The punishment is about presence, remaining absolutely, unbearably present. Historians still argue whether such meditative punishments were spiritually rooted or simply psychological tests disguised as virtue. Zen principles were certainly invoked mastery of the self, harmony through vigilance, but it's also true that servants and junior retainers often bore the brunt of these harsh traditions. Some texts describe wake circles, where accused sleepyheads sat in a ring facing inward, each watching the other for signs of fatigue. The first to nod would have cold water poured on their head, or worse, be assigned to sweep the dojo floor using a bundle of grass and their bare hands. In some schools of swordsmanship, young disciples were made to sleep sitting upright against a wall, katana balanced horizontally across their lap. If the blade tipped or fell, even slightly, they would be struck with a wooden rod and forced to recite martial codes until sunrise. But of course, not all masters were cruel. Some believed in guiding tired students back to wakefulness with ritual. One swordmaster in Kyoto reportedly brewed discipline tea, an impossibly bitter green infusion that smelled like moss and regret. One sip and you wouldn't blink for hours. Back in Lord Takeda's estate, your knees throb, your breath fogs slightly in the garden's night air. A stone lantern flickers in the distance. Somewhere, a night bird chirps, and your body longs aches for rest. You focus on the moon. Another servant stumbles into the gravel path beside you. A low rustle, a sigh, then whip, the fan. Lord Takeda is always watching. The servant is removed silently, respectfully, but you know what that means. He will spend the next 3 days wearing the eyes of the fox, a special headband with painted eyes glued to the front, mocking his inability to stay vigilant. Children in the household will laugh. Adults will avert their gaze. Shame is more powerful than any blade. Yet, oddly enough, there's something noble in this cruelty. To endure wakefulness is to sharpen the spirit. That's what they say. The night, they believe, reveals what kind of person you truly are. And they are right about one thing. In the silence of punishment, you begin to see the world more clearly. The shift of wind in the bamboo, the breath of gravel beneath your toes, the way even exhaustion carries a kind of rhythm, like a poem whispered by bones. And then, just before dawn, you are summoned back inside. Lord Takeda looks at you once, nods, and turns away. No word of forgiveness, no praise, but your fan duty is restored. You've earned another day in the house. You lie down that evening on a simple mat. No pillow, just cloth and quiet. Sleep comes, but this time, it waits for your permission. You're lying on a metal-framed cot now, your arms at your sides, your body covered with a stiff blanket that smells like disinfectant and starch. The room is dim, except for a gas lamp hissing softly in the corner. It's London, 1883, and you're part of an experiment that, despite its white coats and clipboards, feels eerily like punishment. A doctor, tall, bearded, unimpressed, leans over and says, "Try to sleep naturally. We'll be observing your eyelid flutter and foot spasms." Oh, lovely. Welcome to the Victorian Sleep Laboratories, where nothing is quite as restful as it sounds. In the late 19th century, sleep science was suddenly fashionable, but science then was a different beast, a blend of medicine, curiosity, and a strong dose of judgment. Doctors were trying to understand insomnia, nightmares, and sleepwalking, but they were also trying to determine what kind of sleep made you virtuous, what sleep was proper, and what sleep was criminal. So, they built these wards half hospital, half theatre, and filled them with the sleep deprived. Some were volunteers, some were voluntold. If you were poor, unemployed, or a woman with hysterical tendencies, odds were high someone would suggest you spend a few nights in a clinic like this. You're not here for fun. You're here because you've been accused of malingering, faking fatigue to avoid work. A real concern in Victorian society, where stamina equaled morality. People who slept too much were seen as morally lax, indulgent, even dangerous. And so, the tests began. Tonight, you're being evaluated for functional drowsiness, which sounds like a minor offense, but can get you institutionalized if they decide you're unfit for factory shifts or unsuitable for civil service. A woman in a high-collared dress sits at a desk recording your every twitch. She makes a note every time your foot moves. You're not allowed to talk. You're not even supposed to roll over unless they say you can. One man 2 beds down, Edward tried to scratch his nose without permission and got moved to the restraint chamber for disrupting the study. He swears he didn't mean to, that he was dreaming of bees. Historians still argue whether these early sleep labs were genuine attempts at medicine or cleverly disguised holding pens for people society couldn't quite categorize. Most believe it was a bit of both. One documented case involved a woman named Clara, committed for inappropriate napping. She reportedly fell asleep during church 3 Sundays in a row. Her husband brought her to the lab, convinced she was possessed. Doctors found nothing medically wrong, but she was still kept under watch for a fortnight. They fed her boiled eggs, read aloud to her from the Psalms, and noted that she murmured frequently about birds. Her diagnosis: romantic overexhaustion. You shift uncomfortably as your blanket slides down. The room is too quiet, oppressive in its stillness. Somewhere, a nurse turns a crank on a large device designed to stimulate dreaming through auditory induction. It plays warped recordings of lullabies through a tin funnel pointed at your head. You're supposed to pretend this is normal, and when patients didn't sleep properly, there were punishments. Some subtle, fewer blankets, dimmer lighting, colder soup. Some not so subtle. The wake stool, for instance, was a narrow, unstable seat where chronic sleepers were made to balance for hours without dozing. If they leaned too far or started to nod off, they'd fall with a clang that alerted the nurses and added another hour to their observation time. You open one eye and catch the doctor scribbling something on your chart. He circles a line twice. You try not to panic. Maybe this is all part of progress. After all, these labs were responsible for the earliest studies of REM cycles and dream length. They discovered patterned stages of sleep, the concept of first sleep and second sleep, returning to scientific attention after centuries of being dismissed. They proved that dreams weren't random but followed neurological rhythms, but they also proved that even rest could be classified, tested, and if it failed to meet social expectations, disciplined. One report describes a dock worker who slept too deeply. He couldn't be roused with the usual bell or shoulder shake. The doctors assumed he was avoiding work and diagnosed him with voluntary catalepsy. His punishment: he was strapped upright in a chair for 3 nights to retrain the nervous system to respond to social stimulation. Sleep retraining. In a chair, while being watched. You finally begin to drift, your thoughts buzzing, limbs heavy, but then a nurse pokes you with a stick. Don't drift too early, she warns. We haven't started the timing yet. You blink in disbelief. I thought the point was to sleep. She shrugs. Not yet. Not until the dream funnel's warmed. You consider running. But where would you go into a society that sees your exhaustion as laziness, that wants proof? Your sleep is the right kind of sleep, so you lie still, trying not to sigh. You count cracks in the ceiling. You listen to Edward whimper about bees, and somewhere in the distance, a bell tolls for midnight. The tests have begun. You're in a prison cell now, bare stone walls, iron bars, and the stink of old straw. A sliver of light slices through the tiny window above your head. Outside. It's 1841 and somewhere in the streets of Manchester, children are selling newspapers about your case, because you're infamous. You're the man with the sleep shackles. Your crime wasn't spectacular. Petty theft, a few stolen watches, a handful of coins. But what made you famous wasn't the theft. It was what you did in court. You fell asleep, mid-trial, during the magistrate's closing remarks. Right after they said the words with intent to defraud, that's when your head dropped like a sack of grain. Your snores echoed in the courtroom rafters. The bailiff dropped his gavel. The judge leaned forward, blinking in disbelief. Is this a jest? You were jolted awake. Of course, but the damage was done. The newspapers the next day called it the thief who couldn't stay awake. They ran sketches of you curled up on the defendant's bench, mouth wide open, The punishment, one part humiliation, one part innovation. You'd be fitted with an iron device strapped around your ankles and connected by a wire to a tiny bell right above your head. The bell would ring whenever your legs relaxed. If you fell asleep and your muscles slackened, ding, you'd be immediately, painfully, reminded that sleep was not an option. And so, here you are. The sleep shackles were real. Victorians loved contraptions, especially when they merged science and suffering. Some workhouses and prisons used similar devices to keep inmates awake during labor. One workshop in Liverpool designed a chair with a spiked backrest and spring-loaded seat that flipped forward if someone nodded off. They called it the Awakener. In your case, the sleep shackles weren't just punitive, they were public. For the first month of your sentence, you were displayed for 1 hour each morning in a rotating iron cage in the city square. Not to be mocked, they said, but to remind the good people of England of the importance of industriousness. You became a living monument to insomnia. People would stop by and toss bread at your feet. Some children jeered. A few sympathetic women left handkerchiefs. One even slipped a note through the bars, I believe you were just tired. Historians still argue whether these punishments were effective or just performative. There's no doubt Victorians viewed sleep as a moral battleground. Oversleeping meant weakness. Napping during labor suggested corruption. Even fainting was scrutinized, especially if done by women, who were often accused of using it as a tactic. Victorian moral reformers published pamphlets on the dangers of drowsiness. One warned that sleeping during sermons was the first step toward atheism. Another insisted that a child who slumbers past the 6th hour is a child who will steal, fornicate, and forget the crown. No pressure. Back in your cell, you shift your weight. The shackles jingle. Not enough to set off the bell, but enough to rmind you they're still there. Your legs cramp. Your eyes itch. But you hold on, trying not to let your body give in. Sometimes, you hear other prisoners whispering about your punishment. Some mock you. Others are quietly terrified. They'll all have him soon. One mutters, the bellboys. And indeed, there's talk of spreading the device to factory floors. The idea is simple. Clamp a light sensor to the head, and if a worker's nod dips below a certain threshold, ding ding ding, they are jolted back to wakefulness with a burst of cold steam or a slap from a timed paddle. It never quite catches on. Too complicated, too cruel, even for the Victorians. But your shackles, those remain for the full 6-month sentence, and they do their job. You don't sleep, not fully. Your dreams become shallow, twitchy things, fragments of sound, sparks of old conversations, eyes that open before anything happens. One night, in a moment of rebellious peace, you manage to rig a trick. You wedge a rolled scrap of blanket between your calves and the shackle wires. It dulls the movement, masks the drop. You sleep for 17 minutes uninterrupted. It's the best sleep you've had in months. You dream you're in a sunlit field, lying on moss. No shackles, no bells, just the warm hum of bees. Then ding, and it's gone. The guards are furious. They check your bedding. You're moved to a different cell, this one without fabric. But that's 17 minutes. It was enough to remind you that sleep isn't just survival, it's resistance. Later, as you're released, your ankles are raw, your eyes sunken, but you walk upright. You pass a group of dock workers who stare, whisper, point. One tips his cap. Another says, "Go home?" and sleep for all of us. You do, eventually, but even now, years later, when you lie down at night, you still twitch at every jingle, you still startle yourself awake, because once, in the eyes of the world, your greatest crime wasn't stealing a watch, it was falling asleep, a low table, a flickering lamp, and 3 fingers pressed against your temple. You're in the parlor of a spiritualist now, sometime around 1902, in a velvet-curtained home on the outskirts of Vienna. The woman across from you wears a heavy pendant and smells like crushed lilac. She's explaining calmly that your dreams may contain criminal intent. You swallow hard. You'd just come here hoping for clarity, maybe some peace, but instead, you're about to be interrogated not for what you've done, but for what you've dreamt. Welcome to the realm of punishment through dreams, a shadowy edge of fin de siècle psychology, where Freud is a rising star, seances are fashionable, and the line between inner thought and outward guilt has become disturbingly thin. It began simply, you told her about your recurring dream, the one with the cracked mirror, the spinning coin, the shadow with your voice. You didn't expect her to flinch. You didn't expect her to lean back and whisper, someone close to you has already suffered. Now she's offering 2 options, a purifying ritual, or a formal dream analysis, the results of which may be passed on to a consulting authority. She doesn't say police, but she doesn't need to. This isn't entirely fantasy. At the turn of the 20th century, belief in dream culpability was startlingly real. Spiritualists, pseudoscientists, and even some medical professionals believed that the subconscious might reveal a person's true desires, especially criminal ones. Some argued that if a person consistently dreamt of violence or theft, it was not a coincidence. It was the soul trying to confess before the body acted. Historians still argue whether such beliefs ever translated into actual legal consequences. There are whispers of early courts allowing dream testimony as character evidence. He dreamt of arson 3 nights in a row, Your Honor, but no formal precedent was ever set. Still, the social punishments were real. People lost jobs over their dreams. Marriages were broken. A Viennese banker was shunned after confessing, in a séance circle, that he often dreamt of pushing strangers into rivers. He insisted he'd never harmed anyone. But within a week, he was removed from the board of directors and relocated to a less sensitive post. You glance around the room. The psychic has begun to sketch something, a shape she claims came to her when you described the mirror. It's angular, like a blade. She frowns. If your dreams continue, she says, we may need to initiate a karmic redirection, something preventative. You ask what that means. She doesn't answer. Instead, she reaches for a deck of cards and fans them slowly. You're to choose one. You do. It's a card with no face, just black ink swirling outward in a spiral. She sighs. The dream is getting closer, even outside the spiritualist circles. Dreams were coming under scrutiny. Early psychoanalysts began exploring moral dreams, recurring unconscious narratives where individuals committed acts they'd never dare attempt to wake. One study, anonymously published in 1904, documented 40 cases of dream guilt, leading to confessions, some for minor misdeeds, some for things the confessor hadn't actually done. They'd dreamt it, and believed that was enough. You remember a boy in your neighborhood, Johann, who had dreamt of stealing bread. He told his teacher, expecting maybe a laugh. Instead, he was brought before the headmaster, scolded, and made to sit in solitary study for an entire week. Not for the act, for the possibility of the act. At the time, you thought it ridiculous. Now, you're not so sure. You agree to the ritual, mostly out of fatigue. It involves sitting in salt for an hour while listening to a cracked phonograph repeat affirmations over the drone of a violin. Your dreams are not your will. It hums. Your thoughts are not your crimes. Over and over again, you fall asleep. You dream this time of a candle flickering against a window. Nothing else, just quiet. You wake up with your legs numb and your mind oddly calm. The psychic nods. Progress. But when you leave, she gives you a folded slip of paper. It reads, "If the mirror reappears, burn rosemary at sunrise and avoid clocks." Clocks. You're too tired to argue. Back on the street, the gas lamps flicker. You hear a man nearby tell his friend he dreamt of fire and woke to find his chimney smoking. Coincidence, he asks. The friend shrugs. Best not talk about it too loud. You pass a poster for a lecture on the ethics of night thought. Beneath it, someone has scrawled in pencil, "Who polices the mind?" A good question. You make it home, lie in your bed, and stare at the ceiling for a long time. And then you do what feels rebellious. You let yourself dream. The ground beneath your boots is soggy, churned to sludge by hundreds of feet. The air reeks of sweat, smoke, and something sour unwashed wool. Maybe you're in a trench, somewhere along the Western Front, early 1917. And you're so tired your eyelids feel like lead, but you don't close them. Not here, not now, because tonight, the punishment for sleeping is honey. You glance to your left. A soldier is hunched over, chin sagging toward his chest. One of the corporals spots him, creeps up behind, and smears a fat glob of honey behind the man's ears. Everyone stifles laughter. The corporal mutters, "Let's see what the rats think of that." The poor guy jolts upright, swiping frantically at his neck. He'll be on edge all night now, swatting at phantoms. That's the point. You're in the strange, cruel world of military micronaps, a realm where sleep is rationed like bullets. And nodding off at the wrong moment doesn't just get you yelled at, it might get you bitten. Or worse, this trench is part of a rotating unit. Each soldier gets 4 hours of rest per 24, broken into jittery 30-minute slots. Your bunk, a damp dugout half flooded with water. Your pillow, a rolled coat. The moment you lie down, someone else is waking up to take your place. And if you fall asleep on watch, well, that's not taken lightly. There are official punishments. Of course, demotion, extra duty, loss of pay. But the unofficial ones, the ones handed out by comrades too sleep-deprived to be merciful, they're far more inventive. In one unit, dozing guards were tied to fence posts with signs reading "Napoleon in training." Another favored sweat watch, where the offender was made to run laps in full gear until their body was too exhausted to sleep. But the most infamous punishment was the honey method. Not sanctioned, not written down, but whispered through trenches from France to Flanders. If a soldier was caught snoozing during sentry duty, honey would be smeared on their face or hands, attracting every rat, flea, and fly in the trench ecosystem. The message was clear: if you can't stay awake, you'll learn the hard way. Historians still debate how widespread these punishments were. Some accounts suggest they were isolated pranks. Others argue they were systematic morale control, a way of making sure no one dared to let their guard down. In war, after all, sleep becomes a form of vulnerability. You hear stories. A man in another company supposedly dreamt of home, smiling in his sleep. When he awoke, his comrades had stolen his boots and replaced them with 2 slabs of frozen bacon. He spent 3 days slipping across the mud, unable to complain. In one especially grim tale, a soldier in a Scottish regiment fell asleep mid-shift and woke up to find a single bullet standing upright between his boots, a silent warning. Next time, someone had carved into the sandbag wall. The weirdest part, sometimes sleep was encouraged, but only in the name of science. You remember a medic who'd been told to record dream fragments from men under battlefield stress. "The brass wants to know if we are cracking up," he said. He carried a notebook and a tin of smelling salts. He'd wake soldiers mid-dream, ask them what they saw, and scribble furiously. He claimed most dreams were of water, floods, rivers, drowning. One man, shivering under a tarp, told him, "I dream of falling asleep and not waking up." The medic didn't write that one down. You look around now, watching the horizon lighten just slightly. Dawn, a thin line of grey rising over no man's land. Another man nods near the sandbags. The corporal twitches, but lets it pass. Maybe he's too tired. Maybe it's not worth it anymore. And then, surprisingly, a few minutes of reprieve. You get a break. You're led to the rest dugout, a space barely tall enough to kneel in. Inside, 5 men are already snoring. You wedge yourself into a gap, press your cheek against your pack, and close your eyes. You've got 20 minutes. If you're lucky, in that time, you dream of bees, not stinging, just buzzing, loud, constant, and oddly warm. You wake with a start, a faint whistle, time's up, but the dream lingers, and for once, it doesn't feel like punishment. It feels like something soft, something yours, something untouched by mud or commands. You crawl back into the trench, shaking off the ache, knowing you'll have to stay awake until dusk, and hoping, just hoping, no one brought the honey tonight. You're inside a textile mill now, Manchester again, but decades earlier than the trenches, 1850 or so. The windows are fogged with steam, the air filled with the rhythmic hiss of spinning frames, and the sharp, burnt linen smell of overworked machinery. It's hot, deafening, and you are desperately, dangerously tired. But there's no place for sleep here, not even a pause. You blink too slowly, and that's when it happens. A foreman notices. He stalks over, pulling a length of measuring ribbon from his belt, not to take fabric specks, but to snap it against your wrist. A wake-up call. Not the worst one you've seen. Don't drift. He growls. Factory don't pay for dreams. Welcome to the industrial age, where sleep is both stolen and weaponized. You're standing among dozens of child workers and women, all with red eyes and hunched backs, pulling cotton thread for 16 hours a day. Everyone's allowed 2 breaks each, less than 15 minutes. And if you're caught nodding off outside that time, you're fined. Or worse, some factories took sleep punishment seriously, especially as machines grew more dangerous. One blink too long, and your hand could be caught in a loom. or your hair, or your sleeve. So management adopted what they called discipline stations, little nooks where tired workers were sent for correction. They weren't for napping. You remember the first time you saw one? A small booth with a slanted bench, just high enough to prevent lying flat. Inside, a painted sign, "Sleep not, lest you slip and fall in wages or in life." If you were sent there, you'd sit for 20 minutes, staring at a ticking metronome mounted on the wall. Nothing else? Tick, tick, tick. Some workers called it the mind room. Most came out more agitated than rested. Historians still argue whether factory owners actually believed these punishments encouraged safety, or simply served as performance rituals to keep workers scared. In truth, the sleep discipline was about control. An exhausted worker asked fewer questions. A drowsy worker didn't strike. Then there was the notebook. Yes, it was real. Supervisors in some English mills carried small notebooks where they recorded each time a worker nodded off. 3 nods, and you'd lose half a day's wage. 5 dismissal. Rumors swirled of men blackballed across entire towns for habitual drowsiness, and if the offense happened more than once in a week, you might be made to wear a tag around your neck that read, "I sleep on the Queen's time." One woman, Edna, a weaver in her 50s, refused to wear it. She said her eyes were dry from dust, not fatigue. She was fined a full week's wage and reassigned to the dye room, where the fumes were known to knock people out cold. If she wants to close her eyes, the foreman had said, she can do it in paint. And it wasn't just in textile mills. Coal mines had their own rituals. Miners caught asleep during equipment checks were sent back above ground for stone duty, hauling rocks from one pile to another, with no reason but humiliation. A sleeping miner was assumed to be courting disaster or sabotage. You pass through the boiler room now, where the heat is so intense your lungs feel half-cooked. A boy of maybe 11 is slumped near a coal chute. The moment you open your mouth to warn him, a supervisor has already seen. No ribbon this time, just cold water from a ladle. Splashed full in the face, the boy gasps, blinks, then goes back to shoveling. He doesn't complain. Later, in the break room, barely more than a damp alley with a barrel for sitting, you hear another worker joke about dream-proofing. Apparently, someone at the Manchester Mechanics Institute had suggested workers pinch themselves every 30 minutes to stimulate alertness. Another method, binding a walnut between your shoulder blades. If you started to slump, it'd dig in painfully. Didn't work, says a woman chewing on stale bread. I just learned to dream through the pain. You nod. You know the feeling. Even outside the factory walls, suspicion followed. Landlords reported tenants who overslept. A man who missed Sunday church because he slept through the bell was fined and banned from the choir. Schools punished children who daydreamed with dunce caps labelled moonhead. Napping, even briefly, became shorthand for failure. And yet, through it all, people found tiny rebellions. One man carved a nook beneath the factory stairs where he could nap during lunch, curled like a cat. A group of women arranged to take turns fake fainting so the others could rest in the infirmary room for 3-minute intervals. A girl named Elsie learned to dream with her eyes half open. You remember that one most of all. She said her dreams were soft, quieter than the machines. She'd sit still, thread in hand, and imagine sunlight, trees, rest. Tonight, when the mill finally shuts down, you walk home with aching arms and a dizzy head. You collapse onto a cot in a shared room above a tavern, pressing your face into the scratchy pillow. And for once, no bells, no ribbons, no tags, just the sound of your breath and the possibility, however slim, that no one will punish you for what your body needs. You let go and fall into a sleep you earn by surviving. You're strapped to a chair under a bright white light, the hum of electricity pulsing behind your ears. You can feel your pulse in your eyelids. It's 1964 and you're inside a sleep laboratory. But this isn't some quiet place for research. No, you're part of an experiment that feels like a dare. What happens when you can't sleep at all? The technician, clipboard in hand, watches as your eyes flutter. You've been awake for over 80 hours. There's a disco ball spinning slowly in the corner, casting fractured rainbow light across the ceiling. Not for decoration, this is your punishment now. Every time your brain starts to drift into rest, the ball starts turning, and a high-pitched loop of The Twist by Chubby Checker blares through a tiny wall speaker. You volunteered for this. Kind of. They said they needed test subjects to study sleep cycles. They didn't mention the flashing strobe lights, the menthol vapors sprayed in your face, the constant talking, or that one guy who keeps asking you to subtract sevens from 100, just to see if you're still cognitively anchored. Welcome to the strange world of 20th century sleep trials, where psychology, military ambition, and a dash of Cold War paranoia collided into a sleepless fever dream of wires, caffeine tablets, and relentless observation. You were told you'd help advance science, maybe stop insomnia, maybe help astronauts. But what they didn't say is that after 60 hours, most people stop making sense. By hour 72, hallucinations begin. By hour 90, it's not unusual to forget your own name or cry because the floor seems too loud. You're lucky. In a way, you're in the States. Across the globe, other governments are experimenting with more sinister methods. Reports, mostly whispered, claim Soviet labs tried forced wakefulness as interrogation, using sensory flooding to prevent REM cycles. One defector described being blasted with nursery rhymes at random intervals while blindfolded. Historians still argue whether sleep deprivation should be categorized as a form of torture or simply an enhanced questioning method. International law is vague. Some trials used it openly, others buried the evidence. You rub your temples. A nurse leans in and asks how you're feeling. You say, like I've been chewing music. She writes that down. The disco ball spins faster. You resist the urge to laugh. Back in the early 20th century, doctors believed sleep loss would clarify mental illness. In the 1930s, psychiatrists induced insomnia in patients with depression, hoping it would shock the mind into clarity. Sometimes it worked, most times it led to mania. Later, in the 1950s and 60s, with the rise of electroencephalograms, EEGs, researchers got more precise. They could see when your brain entered REM. They could see how long you stayed there, and so the denial of REM became its own study. That's where you are now in the REM block phase. Every time you show signs of dreaming eye movement, heartbeat spikes, they wake you, sometimes gently, sometimes with a burst of cold air or a jarring clang. One subject had water poured on his feet. Another got tickled with a paintbrush dipped in vinegar. The results? Chilling. Subjects deprived of REM sleep for extended periods began to suffer paranoia, rage, involuntary muscle jerks, One man insisted his toes were whispering. Another accused the fluorescent lights of plotting a coup. And then there's you. You dream while awake now. Short, flickering moments like spilled photographs. You swear you just saw your grandmother in the corner, waving, but it was just your own reflection in a two-way mirror. The technician records more data. You smell oranges. There are no oranges. Somewhere in the room, someone says, "You've earned a nap." Your body leaps at the word, but it's a lie. You're handed a mug of weak black coffee and told to sit under a panel of rotating lamps. Just for 5 more hours, they say. There were protests. Eventually, sleep trials were scrutinized in the 1970s and 1980s after reports emerged of unethical protocols. Volunteers kept beyond agreed times. Minors enlisted without proper consent. Some labs quietly shut down. Others doubled down, especially in private military contracts. After all, if you could find a way to train people to function without sleep. But that's science fiction. Everyone breaks. Eventually, even you. They finally let you sleep after 96 hours. The moment you close your eyes, you fall so fast, it feels like drowning. No dreams, just darkness. Total, you wake 12 hours later with cotton mouth, a dry cough, and no memory of the room. The nurse hands you a granola bar. Thanks for your service. No medal, no breakthrough, just the knowledge that you lasted longer than most. You shuffle outside into the sunlight and feel the warmth on your face. You wonder if you'll ever dream normally again. You wonder if it matters. You close your eyes, just for a second, and think maybe we were never meant to know this much about sleep. You're standing in a glass-walled office now, somewhere in the heart of a tech-forward city, San Francisco, maybe Singapore. It's 2023 and you're wearing business casual and carrying a soy matcha latte you didn't really want. On the wall, a cheerful poster reads, "Rest smart TM. Optimize your nap score. You're in a corporate wellness pod zone. The future has arrived, and so has a brand new kind of sleep punishment, modern sleep shame." You glance at the row of nap pods lined up like futuristic coffins, each with glowing biometric displays and built-in aromatherapy diffusers. This isn't a luxury spa. It's your job. Or more precisely, it's your company's expectation that you optimize your sleep so you can optimize your productivity. Sleep, once your sanctuary, has been rebranded as a performance metric. You swipe your ID card. The screen flashes. Last session score 58. Unrestful. Please improve. Beneath that, a blinking note. Consult your supervisor if you experience persistent inefficiency. Yes, your nap score is now part of your performance review. Inside the pod, soft tones whisper words like flow, focus, resilience. A calming voice begins to guide you. Inhale clarity. Exhale distraction. You are expected to fall asleep within 7 minutes. That's the goal. Fall asleep too slowly. The system logs you as lagged. Wake up too groggy. Deficit. You don't get reprimanded, but you do get noticed. Across the office, co-workers whisper about who's too sleepy or pod abusing. No one wants to be labeled a chrono-slacker, a new buzzword for someone who wastes company time by unconscious inefficiency. One woman, Keiko, missed 2 meetings after her nap ran long. Her pod auto-locked on her for safety, but HR flagged her for temporal overextension. She's now on a restorative alert plan, required to wear a smart headband that vibrates if her brainwaves suggest she's drifting off during lunch breaks. Historians still argue whether this is progress or a nightmare in a cashmere hoodie. Some hail it as the democratization of rest-free naps. Smart data. Healthier work-life balance. Others see it as the ultimate commodification. Even your unconscious state is now a product you have to optimize. You remember the old days when people napped in bathrooms, or behind cubicle walls, or just didn't sleep at all. This is cleaner, sure, but it's also colder, because if you fail at sleeping, you're bad at recovery, bad at resilience. You're now failing in ways no one failed before. Your company's internal app features a leaderboard for sleep efficiency. You're currently ranked 143rd out of 200. The top performer is someone named Trevor, who apparently dreams in color-coded task maps and wakes up refreshed with spontaneous Slack drafts. You think he's faking it? Then there's the Sleep Whisperer, a motivational coach hired by HR to help employees visualize better rest. She runs weekly sessions where she asks you to picture yourself as a well-oiled machine, rebooting in restorative cycles. You once compared yourself to a hamster wheel with too many tabs open. She didn't laugh. They've even introduced Sleep Correction Thursdays, an opt-in program where those who consistently underperform in rest metrics are given incentivized encouragement. It includes breath training, caffeine limitation protocols, and if your score doesn't improve, mandatory early bedtime notifications from your company-issued smart home assistant. One intern tried to game the system, faked low scores to get an extra hour off in the afternoons. The algorithm caught on. He was removed from the wellness track and reassigned to the basement archives. The basement has no pods. You try to nap now, lying back as the lights dim inside the pod. You breathe. You focus on stillness. But there's pressure. The pressure of needing to sleep well, to sleep on command, to sleep efficiently. You begin to sweat. The voice returns. Let go of performance. You want to scream. You wake suddenly and check the screen. Session score 41. Cognitive resistance detected. A soft chime signals you to leave. Outside. Someone from HR hands you a pamphlet. Feeling pod pressure, it asks. You're not alone. Join our weekly recharge circle. You smile, nod, toss the pamphlet into the recycling bin, and wonder how we got here. Because somewhere between the Roman soldier whipped for falling asleep and the office worker praised for sleeping just right, something shifted. Sleep stopped being human. It became measurable, gamified, judged. And if you don't keep up, if your scores fall too low for too long, well, you'll get the email. Subject line, let's talk about energy alignment. You'll never nap the same way again. You're floating now, not metaphorically, but literally. A zero-gravity sleep pod hums gently around you, cradling your body in a cushioned vacuum seal. You're on a long-haul orbital habitat, somewhere between Earth and the Moon, sometime in the not-so-distant future. Your vitals are being monitored in real time. Your REM cycle is analyzed. Your heart rate, breathing, and temperature are constantly adjusted through smart bed recalibration algorithms. You close your eyes, hoping for the sweet oblivion of space-assisted sleep. But there's a problem. You're not dreaming enough. And in this new world, dreamers are the ones who matter. A soft voice whispers through the pod. Neural imaging shows minimal symbolic content. Please consult the onboard cognitive technician to improve your imaginative output. You blink, weightless, disoriented. The future has delivered comfort. Sure, no rats, no factory bells, no disco torture, but it's delivered new expectations too. In this world, dreams are currency. You're not being punished for sleeping too long or at the wrong time. You're being judged for what you dream. It started a few decades back when scientists discovered that certain types of dreams correlated with higher problem-solving ability, faster creative learning, and better emotional resilience. Then the tech companies got involved. They began tracking cognitive enrichment in dreams. Soon after, insurance companies started offering discounts for high-quality dreamers. Companies hired lucid consultants to guide elite staff through personalized dream training. The military funded studies on how to induce moral alignment during sleep. You're not surprised when you hear rumors of people getting fired because their dreams were underwhelming. You pass one such person in the habitat corridor. He walks slowly, avoiding eye contact. My index dropped below 40, he mumbles. They reassigned me to supply logistics, manual tracking. I don't even get to pod sleep anymore. Dream shaming. It's a thing now. There are even new slurs. Dead streamer, flat remmer, terms for those whose brains no longer produce compelling sleep narratives. It's a quiet kind of exile. Historians, assuming there are still any, might one day argue whether this was a logical evolution of sleep science or a final corporate overreach. But for now, it's just your reality. You're due for a quarterly dream audit next week. The technician will scan your recorded dream archive, then rate your subconscious performance. Symbols, characters, narrative coherence, emotional fluctuation. Last cycle, you scored a 72. Not bad. But your dream was about walking through an empty city, alone, no dialogue, no metaphors, uninspired. The technician said, so tonight, you try to do better. You take your pre-sleep creativity booster. You review your imagery flashcards. You rehearse your intention to dream of something vivid, something rich, something usable. You drift into sleep again, and you dream of a girl walking barefoot through a medieval street, whispering secrets in her sleep, of a Roman soldier tied to a post for dreaming when he shouldn't, of a monk mumbling in Latin while moonlight floods a chapel. You dream of cold water, honey, whispering clocks, and pods that jingle when your legs relax. You dream, as if your ancestors are whispering back to you stories of how sleep was once feared, shaped, rationed, and judged, how it was punished with sticks, shame, noise, frost, and now, data. But in this dream, no one is watching. No one is measuring. You are simply floating, resting, breathing, and for the first time, in what feels like centuries, you feel safe in sleep. Let the final images soften now. Let the sound of your breath fill the space where the stories once lived. The soldier's torch has gone out. The monk's chant fades into quiet stone. The rattling shackles, the spinning disco lights, the flickering screens, they're all behind you now, dissolving into the hush of something ancient and kind. You're safe. You've walked through centuries of restless beds and uneasy dreams, through punishment and performance, silence and scrutiny, through dusty temples, trench-side dugouts, and sterile labs that buzzed like hornets. You've seen sleep treated as weakness, weapon, and wound. You've seen it sold and scored and squeezed into systems that barely left room to dream. But here right now, none of that matters. You are no longer being watched. No one will judge you for how you drift, how long you take to fall, or whether your dreams are wild or quiet or non-existent. You don't have to perform. You don't have to earn this moment. You can just let go. Let your thoughts untangle. Let your body soften. Let the weight of the day release from your chest, your shoulders, your jaw. Let the hum of this strange old world fade behind a door that only opens for you. There are no more punishments here. Just rest. You've earned it. Sleep well.